introducing Dr. Kiersten Patsch, who likes to be called Kiki. After completing her undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia in environmental science, she earned her PhD in Earth and planetary science with a focus on coastal geology, processes, and hazards at UC Santa Cruz. Dr. Patsch joined the faculty of Cal State Channel Islands in 2015. Through her work, she aims to bridge the gap between the policymakers, scientists, engineers, and private citizens on issues to the coastal zone. Tonight she will speak to the subject of beaches on the edge, the fact that 80% of our beaches are actively eroding, the causes of that erosion, and how we can plan for their resilient future. Let's give a hearty welcome to Dr. Kiki Patsch.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm mic'd up on my scarf, so hopefully you can hear me. So, thank you all for coming out. I'm really honored to be here. This is actually my first time here, and I can't believe this has been here, and I've never been here. I have 4 kids. They're 9, 11, 13, and 15. I had 3 out of 4 birthdays this week, and I'm coming off of a 5-hour faculty meeting. So I've had a lot of cake and a lot of meetings, so I'm happy to be here talking about the thing that I love the most, which is, of course, the beach. So, like Jerry said, I grew up in South Carolina and in Virginia. I came out to California for the first time for graduate school, and I worked with Dr. Gary Briggs. If you're familiar with him, he does a lot of work on kind of beach hazards and processes and things like that. So he was my mentor and really a fantastic one at that. And I came out thinking I was going to study tsunamis and these big natural hazards. And Gary just kind of showed me that there's a lot going on right in our neighborhood, in our beaches, right out here that we enjoy every day. And not that many people actually study the dynamics of the beach. So in my PhD program, I quickly just changed gears from tsunamis to sort of beach and coastal hazards and processes and things like that. So after I got my PhD, I ended up going back to Virginia, having my 4 babies and wondering what I was going to do with my life. And this job came up at Cal State Channel Islands, which wasn't even a university when I graduated. Like, what is this place? What do they need? And it was actually a position that seemed to be written for me. I have this sort of unconventional background where I do a little bit of geology and a little bit of hydrology and a little bit of environmental science, and I study this applied research, and I like art and all these different things, and that's what they were looking for here. They wanted this kind of interdisciplinary look at the coast. So, took the job, packed up my 4 kids, and moved out here in 2015. And since then, I just have been working with the most wonderful faculty and enjoyed Ventura. I live in Thousand Oaks and just really come to love this area. And it was a perfect fit because I actually did my dissertation work on the Santa Barbara-Ventura coastline. So it was kind of coming back 10 years later on what's been happening since I left. And it turned out not a heck of a lot of people had been looking at what was happening since I left. So I was able to really pick up the work I had started in the early 2000s and really look at what, the last 15 years have been doing to the coast, right? Which was great. So that's sort of my background and history. I really come to the coast looking at it with this kind of unique eye where I've got a little bit of geology, I know about the processes, but I also love the beach. It's my happy place. And I want everybody to love the beach and it be their happy place, right? Because at a time right now where we're really looking at sea level rising and our beaches becoming threatened, we need to remind people how much they love the beach so that we can all talk about how best to protect the beach. Right? So that's really what I'm going to talk about today. My talk is titled Beaches on the Edge. Can you see that okay? Looks a little crooked, but that's all right. Okay. The clicker's broken, so I'm going to click it here. So first I'm just going to take you through a little journey of the beach since it's been all rainy today, like the Second time it's rained since I've lived here, but still. A little bit of rain. So here's all the beautiful beaches. Can everyone see that okay? I'm standing right in front of it. Can you see it? Okay, so maybe you've been to these beaches. I really just want you to get in the mind frame of the coast. You all live here, so I'm sure you love the beach. I actually teach a class this semester called The Beach, right? And one of the first things we do is we go around and talk about why you love the beach and things like that. And I actually have a few students that'll be like, I really don't like the beach. Why did you take a class called The Beach? Yeah. Just to tell me you don't like it and learn nothing about it. It's kind of funny. Anyhow, so we have a lot of issues going on at the beach. One, it's beautiful. People recreate at the beach. It's this incredible habitat. I'm trying to talk into the microphone. You have the whole surfing culture. Beautiful sunsets, music. So in this beach class that I teach, erosion, hazards, there's Isla Vista. We're going to revisit a lot of these topics. We're just sort of taking a quick view through it. Oil spills. We have the 20th anniversary of the big oil spill coming up in Santa Barbara. Classes going out. King tides. We have a big king tide coming up on Monday. We'll talk about that and what that is. But it's a great time to go out and look at the beach and see what future sea level might look like. So these are the biggest tides of the year. So those are going to come and you can see where that water actually hits and what areas will start to flood. We'll talk more about that in a second. So through my slideshow, lots of cool things. So I want you all to think about, after that journey through the coast, what the beach really means to you. Because when everyone thinks about the beach, and you just imagine it, everyone sees the beach through their own type of lens, right? My background is in coastal geology, so when I go to the beach, I look at the sand. What color is it? What minerals are there? Are there any cool shells? Could I pick up sea glass? Is the beach wider than it was the last time I was here? Is it narrower? Are there dunes? But that's my lens. So when I talk to people about protecting the beach, I inherently talk about sand. Where's the sand coming from? Is it dirty? Is there trash? Do you see a lot of tar balls? What's the sand look like? But that doesn't resonate with a lot of people. Do I have any birders in here? So a lot of birders will say, if you talk about the beach, like, oh, did you see snowy plovers? Were there leaf terns out there? Were there a lot of crows out there? Right? So when they're looking at the beach, you're thinking of the beach, it's more of this ecological lens, right? If you're a surfer or a volleyball player, when you think of the beach, you think of maybe taking your board out there, and it's the place where you are having fun, recreating, right? Oh, the waves, the huge swell we have, that's what you think of as the beach, is your playground, right? As a mom, when I look at the beach through my mom lens, I think of it as this, cost-effective place to take my family for the weekend. It's free, and everyone can have fun, except for my littlest one who hates sand. Like, how am I your mother? I literally study sand, and you hate sand. What am I going to do with this? But, what I've come to realize is that everyone values the beach in their own way, right? If you're a homeowner, you look at the beach in front of you as a beachfront homeowner as your property, right? That's a very different lens than someone looking at it as a birder. So when we talk about coastal resilience planning and how do we plan for a rise in sea level, how do we plan for our beaches being threatened, when we talk to people, we have to realize that everyone is looking at the beach through their own lens. Everyone's going to want to protect something different, right? And it becomes really hard to manage that. So it's one of the challenges California as a state and really coastlines all over the world are trying to battle with now. Because people look at the beach differently. So I want you to just think about how you value it. So the first question I usually ask my beach class is, what is a beach? Where is the beach? Where's the line for what a beach is? So think in your head, what is a beach to you, right? This is going to really depend on what lens you look at the beach with, right? What is the beach? Well, if you're a biologist or you have that kind of biological thought, your beach, you're going to say, well, it's this natural, biologically functioning ecosystem, and you're going to think of the organisms and the critters. I work with 2 ecologists, and we look at the beach and define the beach very differently. They're like, this is the zone where the critters live, and this complex ecosystem. They really don't mention the sand very much. They don't mention the dunes very much, right? It's really confined to just the sandy part. That's your biologist. As a geologist or an engineer, I'm going to define it by, is it a cobble beach? Is it a shingle beach? Is it fine grained? Does it have powder sand? A geologist will define that beach really differently. And again, your casual beachgoer, if you said, what's the beach? You said, that's where I put my towel, right? So I can hang out, it's where I play volleyball, and it's the sandy stuff down there, right? We all look at it very differently. So one of the projects I'm working on right now is figuring out how to actually value the beach, right? So when we're looking at sea level rise and we're trying to make management decisions for our beach, it all comes down to, well, what's this beach worth, right? If we have a house and we want to protect it with a seawall, that seawall will essentially make the beach disappear. Well, what was the value of that fronting beach? Up until now, when you said the word value, what do you immediately think of? Property, money. How much money is that beach worth, right? And if you don't put a dollar value to it, the value is essentially 0, right? So you say, well, what's the value of the beach? You say, well, it has intrinsic value, it's priceless, right? But that's hard when you're faced with management decisions. You need a value, right? So what we've always defaulted to is, well, it's the economic value of the beach, right? How many tourism dollars does that beach bring in? How many hotels are there? How much are people spending on our town, to go to this beach? But that inherently prioritizes beaches that are recreationally awesome, right? So Santa Monica Beach, hugely valuable, right? But what about Ormond Beach, where you go to look for the plovers? There's no one there. What's the value of that beach, right? Huge, right? So again, depending on what lens you're looking at that beach with, your perception of value is going to be very different. So say I grew up and I always took my kids to Point Magoo, right? To the beach right there, Magoo State Beach. Maybe that's where we always went. So that beach would have an inherent sort of cultural value to me. So maybe my grandfather went there and I went there. I didn't, I grew up in South Carolina. But again, this is another lens, kind of historical value. So we need to figure out how to place value to the beaches so that we can figure out how to manage them, right? So at Cal State Channel Islands, we're a really small program. There's pretty much 4 of us. I'm our geologist, we have 2 ecologists, and then we have a social environmental science person. So we kind of all look at the beach differently. Like, well, this is cool. What if we figure out a way to rapidly assess the beach for all of these different things and then figure out how to place value on that? So we're actually working with an economist out of San Francisco State. He does the economic piece, like what are the dollar values of these things? And we're looking at ways we can actually quantify and measure the ecological value, the recreational value, and then the physical value. So the fact that the beach actually exists has a value in that it serves as a storm buffer, right? So if you live in Pierpont, that fronting beach has value because it's literally protecting you from the waves, right? So how do we measure all of these things? How do we place value to all of these things? And we want to do it in a standardized way, right? So that we can assess all of the beaches equally. That way, Ormond Beach has value, real value, so that when you're looking at what beaches to protect and trying to make all of these trade-offs, that you kind of have a good idea of all the different types of value for a beach. Does that make sense to everybody? Feel free to ask me any questions. I'm used to all my students there. It's totally fine. Okay, so I'm working actually with I'm also working with an art person, but this is with an English professor, and we developed this website called Beaches on the Edge, right? And what we want to do with this is we're starting to interview people with all of these different backgrounds to help communicate all of the different ways that people value the beach, right? So if you are a musician, right, the beach, California beaches have an incredible history, cultural history. So the music that came out of California beaches basically inspired an entire kind of cultural trend around the country and around the world, right? So surf music, beach music, that started here. Volleyball started here. The lifeguards we have a certain way they look at and value the beach. So one thing that we're starting to do is kind of build this group and these interviews to help communicate all the different ways that the beaches are valued by people, right? For our health and well-being, there's a whole genre of books, if you've read The Blue Mind, that talks about how being near the water increases our health and well-being, right? So that's an inherent value. So if you are interested and would like to be videotaped, I'm teaching the beach again, and my students are going to be tasked with finding people to interview, right? So you find value in the beach with your art. So we've interviewed a couple of artists that really can communicate that. So we'd love to interview you and anyone else who has sort of a perspective on the beach that we can share. Also on this website, we have links to good books and things like that. So amazing artists that have been inspired by the beaches, music, skateboarding, surfing, volleyball. And if you really think about what California's beaches have inspired, they are really pretty incredible. And we want to make sure that they have value, right? Because sea level, again, I study sea level rise. And the problem with sea level rise is we're going to run and try to protect all of our infrastructure at the cost of our beaches. And so we really have to make sure that we're willing to make those trade-offs. And to do that, we need to make sure that we communicate effectively the way people value our beaches. Okay, so we're just going to talk quickly about some of these valuable things. So again, when we, can you hear me? Keep moving this away. Okay. When we talk about, again, valuing the beach, usually the numbers that get thrown around are the recreational value of the beaches. So just as an example, California's beaches alone generate over $17 billion of direct revenue to California annually, right? That's a big number. That's why we use that number. Like, oh, we need to make sure that we nourish this beach or protect this beach or dredge the harbor so we can get sand on these beaches. It's a huge economic generator. In California, they create over 350,000 jobs just related to California's beaches. In Ventura County, those look like over 12,000 jobs generated just from the tourism industry for California's beaches, right? And in Ventura County, they generate over $520 million to our county. So again, let's think about what is a beach, right? The beaches are inherently an ecosystem. So when we talk about ecosystems, ones you think about are wetlands, desert. My kids just came home practicing their ecosystems, right? Like, where's the beach ecosystem? That's not one of the main ecosystems, Mom. I'm like, well, actually, it is. We need to start thinking of the beach as an ecosystem, and people using the beach, we're part of that ecosystem, right? So we need to figure out a way to manage it in a way that we're part of it, right? So when I call the beaches an ecosystem, you probably imagine a beach that looks like this. It's really easy to think of that beach as an ecosystem, right? You know what's coming next. How about this one? Is that also an ecosystem?
Yeah, right.
It is, right? So this is the same ecosystem. You have birds here, you have dune grasses. Would you like to be that one lone person out there? So again, you'd be surprised at what people want out of their beach. This is a whole different topic, but if you were to survey people on what types of beaches you like, I want this beach, right? But not a lot of people do. Most people will like this beach. I'm like, really? But it's whether you seek solitude or whether it's just the different lens, right? So it's really important to remember that everyone sees that beach differently. They get something different out of it. But my point here with this picture is that this is also an ecosystem. And with this ecosystem, we have to make sure that we're managing us, the critters, the sand, the dunes. We're all part of this interacting system. Here's another picture of Laguna Beach in the 30s. Look at the, can you see these cool cars back here? Right? And the dunes and little houses. Notice all this really great wrack, kelp, part of that ecosystem. You want to see what it looks like today? There you go, same place, right? And if you wonder why, look at these hotels right here, all this development, the concrete. If you look at what it naturally is supposed to look like, look at this. So in terms of what is a beach, well, a beach is offshore as far as the waves are moving the sand. It comes onshore. All of this dune area back here is actually part of the beach. That's all sand that's moving around. Beaches are inherently dynamic. They're made to move. Beaches inherently are really resilient. Like they're made to get smacked with waves and move inland when the water comes up and move back out to sea when sea level drops. Beaches are this buffer zone that's really dynamic, right? We end up having problems when we draw a line in the sand and we say, this is the beach, and this is not the beach. This is the beach, this is not the beach. So we draw this line, and we want nature to adhere to that. Well, it's not the way it works, right? And so we've got to figure out how to do that. One of the inherent problems is that this ecosystem, this beach, is managed by engineers. I love engineers. I'm married to one, so we have this talk all the time. It's like, not all engineers are bad. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that when we manage our beaches, we tend to let engineers manage this ecosystem, right? So they manage it as if it were a park. Like, let's get all that gross kelp out there because I don't want to put my towel on the kelp. I get it. I don't want to put my towel on the kelp either. But we have to make sure that we understand and communicate that, well, at certain times, that kelp is a really valuable part of the ecosystem. And that kelp has just as much value as the towel space. So we need to make sure that we communicate that and figure out a way to manage it so that we're all in the ecosystem together. Does that make sense? So again, it's having this perspective. And we dredge the harbors. We're going to talk about dredging in a minute, but it's incredibly important that we dredge the harbors because we've built these harbors that interrupt this movement of sand. And if you don't dredge the harbors, all the down-drift beaches erode, right? But you need to do it in a way that you're working with the ecosystem. Maybe that means taking a little longer to dump it out so that the critters have time to make their way up through the sand, right? You need to make sure that you're thinking about the ecosystem. Here's beach grooming in action. It's literally just like raking the beach, which I get. There's a bunch of trash and crud on the beach that is terrible for the marine environment, but is there a better way, right? So again, remembering that the beach is an ecosystem and working to make good compromises, right? There are no easy answers here. It's all going to be compromises. But we want to make sure we're educated. We want to make sure that we're managing it like the dynamic habitat it is, right? Whether it's plovers, turtles, right? In Costa Rica, it's crocodiles, fun birds, right? It's their ecosystem too. It's where their food is. with their little babies. If you've gone on the grunion runs, has anybody done that? See the little grunions come out, right? It's their ecosystem. So we've really got to figure out how we can all play together. Okay, so my focus and background really is in coastal geomorphology. And that's a big word to basically say, how does sand move on the beach, right? So I just want to talk to you a little bit about that. And it essentially just looks at the changing shape of the beach. So first we want to know, well, what do you need to make a beach? What do we need? Sand, right? We need sand to make a beach, that my daughter hates. So you have to have a supply of sand. You have to have some kind of energy to move that sand around. On our coast, it's essentially the waves. So the waves come and hit the sand, and you have to have some place for that sand to accumulate, right? So here it accumulates on our beaches. Where does the sand come from? In California, 70 to 90% of our sand comes from the rivers, right? On the East Coast, it's a different story, but out here, the majority of the sand on our beaches comes from rivers. So you have the streams and rivers flowing through the bedrock. It erodes it a little bit, and it starts its little incredible journey until it's deposited down to the ocean. So living around here, we have some great sand-supplying rivers down here, right? We've got the Santa Clara River, which is the largest sand contributor to this region. The Ventura River is up there that have a purpley pink sand. So again, those are reflective of the land that's near it. So what rocks are eroding to bring down those minerals to make the sand, right? So Pfeiffer Beach with the purples and the pinks has a lot of garnet in there, a little amethyst in there. Some beautiful minerals. If you can ever look at sand under a microscope, it's absolutely gorgeous. So again, 70 to 90% of sand comes from those rivers, and the other portion of the sand actually comes from the erosion of our sea cliffs. So a lot of the sea cliffs in this area are actually uplifted marine terraces, mostly up in Santa Barbara, but some around here as well, which used to be the beach. And then they were uplifted over time, sea level changed, and we're eroding that, right? So a lot of it, former beach, is now being eroded to make new beach, which is awesome. The problem comes, and we'll talk about this, right? So does anybody know where this is? Isla Vista, right? This is some awesome student housing in Isla Vista. I took a summer school class there one time, and you know, there's so many students that are renting out this place, and then they'll have like the balcony all roped off. Like, I wouldn't go out on the balcony. Kidding. So again, this is sad for the houses, but as it's eroding, all this material is actually contributing sand to the beach, right? So we need to remember that when we go to protect houses and put a seawall in front of it, you're preventing a source of sand from ending up on the beach, right? So inherently your beach might erode. So here's the Santa Clara River, again, very close to here. So most of the sand in this area comes from the Santa Clara River, but you have to have enough rain to breach this barrier to allow the water to come out the sand, right? So as you all know, that doesn't happen all that often with these huge rain events that we're having. It actually flushes out a ton of sand that will actually then feed the beaches for a decade, right? So these big flushes of sand are really important because, again, it's providing the sediment that'll feed the beaches for a while. So how does sand move on a beach, right? We said we need sand, and we need some kind of energy to move it around, right? Here, that energy comes from the waves. So our beaches, when I talk about geomorphology, how does that sand shift and change? Well, that's really dependent on the waves, right? If you went out on the 9th of January, I only remember that because it's two of my kids' birthday, but we had that huge wave event. If you went out to the coast, like, where did all the sand go? Well, that really high energy wave that came in, it picks up those sand grains and moves it down the coast. So if you were out there and you watched any of the surfers trying to paddle out, and they go out and all of a sudden they're like way down the coast, That's what's happening to the sand too. So the waves are picking up those sand grains and moving them down the coast, right? So sand can move in a number of ways. One is just kind of rolling. So if you watch the waves, they come up at an angle, right? And then they go straight back down, so it pushes those little sand grains up at an angle and straight back down, and up at an angle and straight back down. So even if those sand grains are only moving a centimeter for every wave, think of how many waves are hitting it every day, every year. So those little sand grains can make the 144-mile journey from north of Point Conception all the way to the Magoo Submarine Canyon. That's how your sand is moving here, right? So it's making that sort of incredible journey a little bit every day. Okay, so what is sea level, right? So when we talk about how the beach moves, the beach is really dependent on where the water is, right? Because the water is what's moving that sand around. So if sea level was lower, the beach would be lower, right? If sea level is higher and you have a natural system, that beach is going to move up with sea level, right? Because those waves are going to come and they're going to pick up the sand and move it. So whether they're picking it up and moving it here or picking it up and moving it here, the beach will move with it, right? So when we talk about what's happening to our coast, again, if we draw that line and we say, this is the beach, and sea level comes up, there's no place for that sand to move anymore, so it'll go offshore, right? So if you draw that hard line, the ocean will essentially take the sand either down coast or offshore. So again, sea level, with the rising sea level, beaches are naturally dynamic, so they will move in with sea level. They'll move out with sea level. Sea level's been a lot higher than it is today, and it's been a lot lower than it is today. It's very dynamic. But again, the beaches have to be given that room. So if you go around the world, and there's an awesome guy, his name is Dr. Beach, I wish that was my name, but he goes around and he looks at all these different beaches. No two beaches are alike, right? Because they all have different waves, they have different sand, they have different sort of geographic settings where that sand is accumulating. So my goal is to go to all the beaches. That's how I got the job. I was a psychology, film, and women's studies major, and then I took my first class called Beaches and Rivers, Beaches, Coasts, and Rivers it was called. And my professor was like, and here's when I went to the Virgin Islands for my research, and here's my research in Greece, and here's my sabbatical, in the Bahamas. This is an awesome job. You can study the beaches for a living. Sign me up. And 4 kids, and it's a little harder to travel, but in my mind, I'm going to all these amazing places. Okay, so the key questions on what I look at is, where is the sand coming from? How is it moving on the beach? What are we doing to the sand supply? And how are we going to deal with these shifts in the sand, right? And again, when we look at how we value the beach, this is really important because keeping sand on the beach is important for recreation. You can't play volleyball if there's no beach. You can't throw down your towel if there's no sand, right? It's important in terms of ecology. You need a place for the critters to be, right? Where is that rack coming up? You need sand, right? And then it's important, again, just because it's literally there and it's a buffer to everything behind it. It's sort of our first line of defense against the sea, right? That's what the beach is there for. It absorbs a lot of that energy. Okay, talk about that. I end up talking a lot, so I gotta pare down my slides, I think. Anyhow, so again, we talked about this. How does sand move on the beach? Most of the waves come and hit the shore at an angle. There you go. They hit the shore at an angle, so it pushes that sand up at an angle and straight back down, up at an angle and straight back down. So here's another visual. So the waves are coming in. Here in California, we have a real predominant direction of what we call littoral drift or longshore transport. And that's essentially this current that develops in the direction of movement, right? So if the waves are coming this way, you get the longshore current this way. You've probably been in a longshore current if you've been swimming in the ocean. and you come out here and then you get out and your towel, you can't find it, right? You're in the longshore current. It's the same thing that's moving your sand. So in California, most of our big waves come from the northwest, right? So they come down, so most of our sand will move in the southerly direction, right? In the summer, we have some swell that comes up from the south, but the waves are typically smaller. So if you think about how that sand is moving, it's like a lot of movement to the south in the winter and a little bit to the north in the summer. A lot to the south in the winter, a little bit to the north in the summer. A lot, right? So that's how it's moving. So generally, it's kind of going down the coast, like this. It's kind of hard to see, but these little arrows are showing the coast of California. These are all the little rivers that are supplying sand, and this is the direction of sand movement. So for some of my work, I went through and I created sand budgets, right? So I'm like a sand accountant for all of California. Where is all the sand coming from? Where is it going? And if we armor all of the sea cliffs, how much sand are we going to prevent from ending up on the beaches? And, you know, as an idealistic grad student, I was like, yes, I'm going to make a case for how we should never armor, right? And then it turned out that most of the sand was coming from rivers and streams. You could really armor the whole coast and wouldn't really affect sand supply a whole lot. I don't know how to say that. So then we just focused on dams and rivers and, you know, it's just one of those things. But okay, so there's California. So again, that's literal drift and how sand moves. We really didn't understand how sand moves, actually, until the 30s. And it was actually the construction of the Santa Barbara Harbor when we first started to understand that sand moves down the coast. So in 1929, they built the breakwater here for the Santa Barbara Harbor, right? 1929. Again, we really don't understand how sand is moving along the coast yet. So they built the breakwater to provide this little safe haven. And they're like, this is amazing. We got this big beach here. I don't know how that happened, but that's amazing, right? Until a few years later, in Carpinteria, in 1933, they experienced the worst erosion they have ever experienced. How did that happen? So a lot of research money was put in to figure out, okay, what's going on here? And that's when we really started to understand the concept of the longshore current and literal drift. So then engineers are like, wow, we can really manipulate the sand. So we started to build a lot of structures, like the groins you see out here, right? That are perpendicular to the shoreline, and they're essentially built to interrupt the longshore current, right? But you do one, and you make an awesome beach, and then you get erosion down here. So then you have to build another one, and you get a good beach. Now you have erosion down there. You're like, damn it, now I got another one, and another one. So all of a sudden we realize, okay, what we do up here really affects everything down here. So we really need to manage regionally. But if you've had any, involvement with management, we don't manage regionally. We manage on a city scale, maybe a county scale, but definitely not a regional scale, right? Okay, so here's some of those engineering structures. Again, these structures that are built perpendicular to the coast are built to actually hold sand. And you get accretion or growth of sand on the updrift side and erosion on the downdrift side. So here, again, you've got your jetties, and the difference between jetties and groins is really what they're doing, right? Jetties are typically built in pairs, and they're built to stabilize an inlet of some sort to a harbor or between barrier islands or something like that. That's a jetty. A groin is just built here to trap sand, right? It's not maintaining an inlet. So we have the jetties here, and notice you get accretion or growth of the beach on the updrift side, and you get erosion on the downdrift side. So again, you're blocking the sediment. So the waves are coming like this. The sand is moving down the beach, right? It gets here and it stops. And you just cut off that source of sand from here. Here's another example. There's your groin. So you've got groin, jetty, and this is a breakwater, so that's built offshore, perpendicular to the coast, and that literally breaks the water, so you make all the energy, you make the waves break right here so they can't pick up as much sand, right, so we use those a lot. And here you can see the jetties, not the jetties, the groins, and you can see the direction of the longshore current, right, say it in your head, which way is it going? It's going this way because you see the accretion here, and the erosion here. So buildup of sand, eroding sand. And they usually have to be built in this field, we call it a groin field, because you keep blocking the sand and have to make your way down so you get the beach that you want. As sort of a public service, you have to be really careful when you swim in these areas because you can get really big rip currents that will develop here. So you have to be very careful if you're swimming near groins. Okay, so once we started figuring out, how littoral drift was working, we realized that in California, we actually have a lot of natural barriers to drift, right? So we have quite a lot of headlands that jut out and prevent sand from moving around them, right? We also have these really deep submarine canyons that start to intersect our coast. So this is the Monterey Submarine Canyon here. But we've actually got one really close to here. Who knows what it is? Fort Hueneme, the Hueneme Submarine Canyon. And we have another really big one. What's that one? The Magoo Submarine Canyon, right? So Fort Hueneme was actually one of the best placements of a harbor because it's right at the mouth of the Hueneme Canyon. So we're going to talk about dredging, but that harbor doesn't have to be dredged all that often because, one, it gets caught in Channel Islands Harbor, right? But then it's got the channel mouth, or the submarine canyon mouth right there as well. So we realized in California, we have all these natural barriers to littoral drift, right? So what they figured out in 1977 was that you could actually compartmentalize California's coast into what we call littoral cells. And it's like these perfect little laboratories where no sand is coming from the updrift side and you're losing all the sand into the canyon, right? So we could really study how sand was moving in this cell. So it's like these perfect little beach compartments. So it started to form our framework to understand where the sand is coming from, where is it going, how is what we're doing in terms of engineering affecting all of these other areas, right? So I ended up developing these sand budgets for all of the littoral cells in California. Where is all the sand coming from? Where is it going? How do we manage all of this stuff? It's pretty interesting. So one of the cells I focused on was actually this cell, the Santa Barbara littoral cell. So the cell starts actually a little north of Point Conception, closer to Point Abuelo here, and it goes all the way down until it terminates into the Magoo Submarine Canyon. It's 144 miles of coastline. So when you think about your sand down here at Ormond Beach, it could have come from north of Point Conception, right? That sort of mentality of how far your sand is traveling, not a lot of people really understand. Managers and planners certainly don't take that into consideration. So everything that's happening down here, even near Channel Islands, is really affected by what's happening up here, right? So as you kind of move down the coast, you have some bigger rivers that are supplying more sand, right? But eventually, all the sand from here makes its way all the way down into the Magoo Submarine Canyon. And the entire coast of California can be broken up like that. So here's your Zuma cell, Santa Monica cell, the San Pedro cell. And again, all of these cells start at some sort of headland and terminate at a submarine canyon. So these are perfect little laboratories. So this is a little schematic of all the sources and sinks of sand. So again, sand is coming from rivers. It's coming from sea cliff erosion. Some places down in San Diego where they have really sandy cliffs, actually the majority of their beach sand is coming from that erosion of the cliffs. So it just depends on where you are. So this idea, you have this perfect compartment We call it a sand shed, right? The name of my lab at school is actually called the sand shed because, again, it's like a watershed. People have a good idea of what a watershed is, right? So if you look at the land, it's all the area that's drained into a certain stream is the watershed. Well, a sand shed is a big stretch of coast where all the rivers are contributing sand to this one shed, right? Literally the sand shed. You could also call it a littoral cell or a beach compartment, but I kind of like sand shed because it helps people wrap their idea around what's happening there. So if you think about your sand budget, again, if you have more sources of sand than sinks, your beach is going to grow, right? It's like your checking account. If you have more money deposited into it, your bank account's going to grow. If you have less sand coming into the cell, right, than you do leaving the cell, your beach is going to erode. And if you're kind of equaling it out, where your sources are equaling your sinks, you have what we call an equilibrium beach. So just depending on your sources of sand and your sinks of sand, that's going to determine what's happening to your beach. So why do we care what's happening to the beach? Well, it's really important when we talk about how we're going to manage our beach, right? Where we're going to put groins. We have to understand that if we put a huge groin field up near Santa Barbara, that could affect beaches 100 miles down the coast, right? Where is that sand? So we really need to understand how it's moving along the coast. So trying to figure out exactly how much sand is moving along the coast is really challenging. So one way that we can measure that is actually looking at harbor dredging, right? So harbor dredging can give us an indication of how much sand is moving past an area, because we typically have to dredge our harbors to a uniform depth, right? And make sure that they're navigable. So we have the Army Corps of Engineers or private dredgers who come in and they have to keep really great records on how much sand they're removing from that harbor, right? So I compiled all the dredging records, which were in somebody's office, and I photocopied them and typed them all in, because we have a long history of dredging in California, right? Santa Barbara Harbor, again, was built in 1929, and then subsequently we put all these harbors in California. So essentially we take the sand, we dredge it, and we put it down drift, right? For a long time, we would dispose of it offshore until we realized that we really need that sand. It's so valuable. So we figured out ways to allow it to continue its journey. So we built these harbors, sometimes in great places like Crescent City Harbor, right at the top of a littoral cell, or Port Hueneme, right? Right at the mouth of a canyon, where inherently they weren't going to catch a lot of sand, so they have literally zero dredging requirements, right? And then we have some unfortunate placements of harbors like Channel Islands Harbor, right? Right at the end of a littoral cell where you have 1 million cubic yards of sand moving by every year. That's going to have a high dredging requirement. So all of these harbors are placed in the littoral cell at places where essentially they catch it, we measure it, and then we put it down the coast, right? So it's a great proxy of littoral drift. So here's an example of Channel Islands Harbor, actually. So Channel Islands Harbor was built so that this is actually the sand trap. So it would trap the sand before it gets into the harbor mouth. Sometimes works, not all the time. A lot of times this will fill up and then sand will fill up in here. So we dredge it from here and here. We put a little of the sand here, whoops, and then put the rest of it down here, right? Now, naturally, without the harbors, a lot of that sand would end up going out into the Hueneme Submarine Canyon. So we actually allow it to continue more of a journey by placing it down here until it goes down into the Magoo Submarine Canyon. So, if you look at the harbors, here's the Santa Barbara cell. There's the Santa Barbara Harbor, the Ventura Harbor, the Channel Islands Harbor, and the Port Hueneme Harbor, right? So remember, you have all these little rivers that are contributing more and more sand as you move down the cell. So if you look at those harbor dredging, you guys know the harbors, so I'm going to spend time on that. There, so here are the dredging volumes, right? So Santa Barbara Harbor dredges over a lot of years. I have records dating back to 1933. So about 300,000 cubic yards per year. Now this averages out all the year-to-year variations. So you have some years where there's more, some where there's less, some years where you don't dredge. But overall, you have about 300,000 cubic yards of sand dredged from Santa Barbara. They take it out, put it down coast. You add sand from the Ventura River and some other streams, and you get about 600,000 cubic yards of sand getting dredged from the Ventura Harbor, right? You add then the Santa Clara River, little streams, and you have about 1 million cubic yards dredged out of the Channel Islands Harbor. So again, we really have to think about these things and how important that sand is. So one of the things we do is we go out and we measure beach change, right? How is that beach changing? How is the width changing? We do that with a number of different tools. Here's our laser survey. We go out with the students and we measure the beaches and what's happening. We also do that with drones. So I'm going to show, I have a video here. Let's see if it'll work. So the unmanned aerial vehicles, the UAVs or the drones, we can go up and we can get these pictures of the beach. I think I'm just going to not do that. Let's see. There we go. Well, I'll leave my PowerPoint with you, but essentially this is one of the images that came from when they were dredging the Ventura Harbor. So this is actually, they're spewing the sand out right here. And our resolution on these images is 2 centimeters per pixel. So you can actually like fly into this incredible photo that you've made, and you can see footprints and little birds and critters, and you get this like 3D model. We actually 3D printed a beach, which was really cool, based off of this drone imagery. So it's taken our surveying to a whole new level in sort of our change detection, how we can really monitor what's happening in terms of coastal geomorphology. Are the dunes getting bigger, smaller? Do we see more kelp, right? What are we looking at? So you can do a lot with these drone images. This is Mondo's Beach, if you've been up near Santa Barbara, closer to Santa Barbara, where you have the houses right here. So again, we get this incredible, this was taken from the drone, so we can look at changes in the beach, and from that, we can look at elevation, right? So again, remember we're getting these 3D maps, so we can get really detailed elevation maps. We call that a DEM, right? So then we can look at those and compare them over time to really figure out how those beaches are changing. And then we can tie that in to changes in sand supply, right? If the beach is narrowing, what's happening? Are we reducing the sand being supplied to the area? Is sea level coming up? What has shifted? Because the beach is no longer in equilibrium, right? So those are some of our cool tools. We'll bypass that. So one thing we really look at is, well, what's the problem? Why do we see erosion in so many beaches? Well, one of the big reasons is that we've dammed up a lot of the rivers. And again, we did that before we really understood how important rivers are in terms of their sand supply, right? So when you put a dam in the river, you reduce the flow of the river so it can't carry as much sand, right? And you essentially cut it off from the coast. So this is a picture of the Matilaha Dam on the Ventura River here. I'm working on a project right now where we're collecting drone data to model and simulate what the coast might look like if the dam is removed, right? So that's a pretty cool project we're working on. The Ringe Dam down in Malibu, that one as well. So there's some really interesting sand supply issues there. So there's a lot of changes down in the Malibu area on where's the sand, right? Why are the beaches eroding? Why are they out of equilibrium? We have to look at the source of the sand, right? So the Ringe Dam is another big one. We've channelized a lot of the rivers and streams. So when you channelize a stream, right, you're not allowing it to pick up that sediment anymore. That's our beach sand. So again, we manage a lot of things in ways that essentially we're making a choice to lose our beach. So that's where that whole value of the beach. Do we care about the beach? Yeah, but we care about these other things too. So we need to figure out how to think about everything. Or, right, we talk about how we're going to manage the beach. We're probably actually going to see a lot of this on Monday, right? So what happens when you draw a line in the sand and you say, this is my development, and here's the beach? Well, sea level's coming up, you get storms, you get waves, you have king tides, which are just the highest tides of the year. Again, those are going to simulate what sea level looks like by the end of the century. So a lot of that is, we drew the line, we protected the house, and now everything's gone, right? So we've got to figure out how to manage all of that. So now if you've driven down Highway 1, like, we see a lot of it. There's a lot of erosion happening. Our beaches are eroding. Why is that? We've tied up our sand behind a number of dams. We've armored a lot of the sea cliffs where you're preventing that sand supply. You also cause the waves to reflect and refract off of the hard concrete, which gives them more energy to pick up more sand. So you actually increase the erosion in front of that wall, right? So there's a lot of things we're doing that are not necessarily good. So I just took this picture out on the promenade last week where we had a managed retreat project where they did a really great job moving parking lots back and shifting the bike path to really work with the ocean. And that was great for a number of years, but now we're back to eroding the area. So we really need to figure out, what do we value? What do we want to protect, right? If we want to protect the walkway, we could armor this, but then you lose the fronting beach. Do you want to walk there if there's no beach? I don't know. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but these are all things that you need to think about of what you're doing, right? So here's some houses perched atop a cliff. What do? Do we protect the house? You can see they tried to. Do you see this wall? It works so-so. Eventually the water is going to win. When you fight water, usually the water wins. It might take a little while, but it's pretty persistent. So again, you have to decide what you want to value. This is down at Nicholas Canyon. So they just had a ton of cliff erosion down there. So if you're going down Highway 1, the beach is right there. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is a drone image. This is, I don't know if you can see this. You see this guy right here and his surfboard? Can you see that? So, you know, whenever I'm walking along the beaches, I teach my kids, like, if you see a lot of cobbles right here, don't put your towel there. That's an indication that these cliffs literally will erode on you. So this guy's back here with his surfboard, and this whole bluff just, and you're like, dang it, right? And so he's like trying to pull out his board, and it's kind of funny. So Highway 1, if you've driven down the coast a little bit, it's flooded right now. They keep having to close this road. There's some water pipes right here that go down to the campgrounds. This is that big dune, Thornhill Broom dune, right? So that whole road is wiping out. And again, we have to manage this coast. What do we value? In this case, we value the road because we want people to be able to drive. But if we armor that, we're making a choice to lose the beach, right? And as long as we're okay with that choice, then we can move forward. But the problem is we make a lot of these choices in an emergency situation where we don't fully think about the consequences. And if we continue to do that without understanding, we're going to make a lot of these choices and all of a sudden lose that beach, right? That's why we're here. Again, more pictures. This is, well, that last one was a video of Pierpont area and the beach just last week when we had those big waves, right? So you could really see, I'm actually working with the Pierpont people right now to look at their dunes. The homeowners don't like the dunes there, but I wanted to show them that the dunes are actually protecting you. You hate them because you can't see the beach, but those dunes are actually your only line of defense against the waves. So it was really interesting. My students were out there flying it. You can't see it, but they were out there flying it with a drone, and you could literally see the areas that had the dunes in front of them. The water comes up, and it'll erode that dune, but it's eroding that dune instead of the water coming into your house. And the minute you didn't have that dune, the water came in, flooded the houses, and went behind there, right? So those dunes are really serving an important purpose. Oh, maybe more. You want to see it?
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I'm out of time, so I'm almost done. Almost done. So here's Pier Pond. Again, you can see where the water went. This wasn't even at the big high tide. This is just the waves. So again, you should go out Monday because I'm sure it'll be even worse than this. But you can see here, look at back here, this is all flooded. No dune, flat, all flooded. Look at this nice big dune here. See those houses? Protected, right? Those beaches actually serve a pretty important purpose. This is pretty slow, so I'm just gonna move on because I'm over my time. Over my time.
So will the dunes keep being eroded?
Yeah, they'll continue to be eroded, and then they build up, and then they get eroded, and then they build up. So dunes will form if you have a nice wide stretch of beach and fine-grained material. So they'll naturally build up, they'll naturally vegetate, and then they're essentially there to be eroded, right? And then they build up again, and then they erode. So it is pretty awesome. So if you're interested in what your area will look like with sea level rise, the USGS has a great online tool called the Cosmos model. That's an acronym for like coastal something, something, something. But it's really great because you can look at all these different topics. You can look at different sea level rise scenarios. You could look at, okay, well, what's going to happen with the everyday storm? What's going to happen with the 100-year storm? And then you can see all the areas that will be flooded and what that looks like. And again, a really great way to visually see it is to go out with the king tides on Monday. What is this going to look like in 2050? What is it going to look like in 2100? You're going to be able to see that with the king tides. So this is our annual flooding for 3.3 feet, which is fairly a low estimate, right? Projected for 2100. So here are all the areas that are flooded, right? That are literally underwater. So right now, the Coastal Commission is having localities plan for a 10-foot sea level rise. This is a 3-foot sea level rise. So you can imagine what that map looks like with 10 feet of sea level rise.
Where is that exactly?
This is Ventura Harbor. Here, this is Emma Wood, Ventura Harbor, Surfers Point, right? And so they have this for the whole coast. And so it's really interesting. NOAA also has a sea level rise viewer, right, which is more of a bathtub model, so you can't put in different storm systems or different scenarios and things like that. All right, so our beaches are threatened. And the last thing I'll talk about is a project we just finished up, which looks at coastal armoring. So how many seawalls we have, right, how many protective structures we have. And basically the one takeaway there is that the total armoring in California, like all the seawalls and things like that, we've armored 14% of the coast, which doesn't seem like a lot, but California is a big state. If we break that down to just Southern California, we've armored almost 40% of the coastline. Like, that's a lot. So 40% of the coastline has some sort of seawall structure in front of it. So that's really going to affect our sand supply. And that's it. Only a little over. Time for questions? Are we done?
Sure.
Anybody have any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Kiki?
Yes.
What about the people that are presently living in areas that will eventually be taken by the water?
You know, it's really hard. As a scientist, you should totally move. But there's hard decisions, right? So all of our localities are currently working on their coastal resilience plan and how they're going to manage sea level rise in the future. And it's just going to be a series of choices. So that's why we're working to basically figure out how we value the different beaches, because those choices are going to be really challenging. Okay, we're going to put armoring here to protect this at the cost of this, and then we're going to add sand down here. It's going to be a big game of Tetris kind of thing. It's challenging. I grew up on an island. My parents still live there. My brother just bought a house, and I'm showing him these sea level rise things as a scientist. This is like literally what I do, your sister. Don't buy this house. We bought it. My sister bought one. They're all there because we grew up there, and they want to, you know, most likely it'll take a little while. It's not going to happen all in one day. So every year we're going to have new challenges and new decisions to make, but it's going to be tough for most of the people in California.
Well, do those decisions involve moving in?
A lot of them do, but a lot of them also involve beach nourishment, placing more sand on the beach. Some of them involve armoring structures. Some of them involve relocating and moving back, the managed retreat or the not so managed retreat, right? So again, water wins in a lot of scenarios, and there's some really hard choices that are going to have to be made. Yes.
How high do you think the ocean will raise if every bit of snow in the world melted?
That's a good question.
About 3 inches.
About 3 inches.
Because 74% of the earth is water right now,
Yeah.
and only about 3% of the land, or, you know, Antarctica and whatever. But they got mountains there that they're 2-3 miles high, so the snow is only maybe, you know, ice is maybe a mile thick up there.
Yeah, there's a lot of scientists studying that right now. A lot of scientists studying glacier melt. So you have sea level rise in one because of thermal expansion, the fact that water physically takes up more space when it's warm than when it's cold. So that's actually 2/3 of sea level rise is just from thermal expansion. And then you also have the melting of the glaciers, which adds water to the system. But with that, you also have isostatic rebound. That's a big word that basically says the crust will shift with different weights. So in some places, the sea level will actually go down. But in a lot of places, if you're rebounding this way, sea level will actually go up more significantly in other places. So the actual water entering the ocean is just one piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, well, like I say, all ice that's in the water right now, it makes a 10% hole when it melts.
Right, but that's sea ice. That's like ice melting in your Coke.
Yeah, I don't know what I was saying, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah, that's true.
that area when it melts.
Right, that's true. Yes.
Could you describe the king tide?
The king tide, right? So that's what we really call the perigee spring tide. So it's where, because of the gravitational attraction between the sun, the moon, and the earth, they all kind of align and they're very close together. So it pulls the water and creates the largest tides that we see during the year, right? So it's nothing fancy or new. We just gave it this cool name called king tide, and it makes it seem awesome. But why it's significant, the Nature Conservancy has a great program where you can take pictures of it. So they have everyone go out and take pictures and upload it to this website so you can see like a simulation of what would be flooded, say with a 2-foot sea level rise, right? So what might it look like in 2050?
Or where do you recommend you go to see this?
Anywhere. I mean, I would just walk the Ventura Promenade, right? So you could really see, in a lot of cases, that water is going to come up, over, and flood. But if you're curious about anywhere, any flat area, you know, you're really going to see things start to flood. And it all depends as well on when the high tides are. So the high tide, king tide, I think is around 8:30 in the morning. So you want to go out early and check it out, right? When it's low tide, that's your king low tide, so it'll be really low, right?
Well,
So
when
you
is
want to
when is the low?
like 12 hours after that, 6 hours after that. So you can look at a tide chart and get the 2 high tides. You'll see it the 21st and the 22nd. And then anywhere you're really interested in going to check it out, right? If there's a cliffed area, you'll see the tides come up and really start to hammer the bottom of the sea cliff. So you might see some big cliff failures, right? So there's a lot of great documentation out there.
Sorry, I don't know a lot about.
Yeah.
Is there a leading up to it? Like, let's say Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or is the waves just getting stronger and
Yep,
higher?
so it's really the tide. So the tide will pull in, and then you have waves on top of that tide. So depending on what, I actually haven't looked at the forecast for waves. Does anybody know?
High on Friday.
Yeah, so I think even if we have decent waves, it's going to be on top of that high tide, right? So if we had a huge swell and a king tide, you see a lot of erosion and a lot of cliff failure and things like that. But even with just some regular waves and that really high tide, you'll be able to go out there and just kind of see, okay, this would be the regular tide. And then you would put high tide on top of that. And then you would put king tide on top of that. So it just gives you an idea of what everyday high tide might look like. It's pretty neat.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. Come back next month, guys, because the speaker will be Richard Sinnott, and he will talk about Earl Stanley Gardner, the creator of the Perry Mason detective stories. You don't want to miss that.